Patricia Devan was a lonely lady in need of love. During the fall of 1992, Patricia placed an ad in the classifieds of her local newspaper to hopefully find a companion. It would prove to be a move that would dramatically alter her life. It drew the attention of a man named John Vassi, a man who seemed to be everything she was searching for. He was charming, attentive, and full of grand romantic gestures, the kind of man women dream about. He swept her off her feet, showering her with affection and promises of a beautiful future. By June 19, 1993, Patricia was convinced she had found her fairy tale ending. She married John, and her life merged with his as she went to Galena, Illinois, with her 2 children. The quaint small town seemed an ideal setting for their fresh start. But something dark and dangerous lurked below the surface of their picture-perfect new life. For a while, things seemed normal, but Patricia was not to have a happy ending to her story. It was a typical afternoon, and school had just let out at River Ridge Elementary when Patricia's 10-year-old daughter, Cassie, stepped out into the afternoon sun to find her stepfather, John, waiting for her at the curb. It wasn't unusual. He picked her up from school often. They made a few stops getting ice cream, stopping by his workplace for a few minutes, and then finally heading home. But the instant Cassie stepped into the house, she felt something was terribly wrong. Shades were pulled down and odd. Contorted shadows stretched out in all the quiet rooms. Air hung heavy as if ready to choke a breath away. John opened the door, and Cassie flew in but came to an immediate dead stop. Her mother lay on the dining room floor, unnaturally still. First, Cassie assumed that her mother had only hurt her back and had lain down. But something was not right. Her mother's skin was a weird, discolored color, and she was not moving. The air in the house felt different, silent, heavy, expectant. Minutes later, an ambulance pulled in, and paramedics whisked Patricia to the hospital. It was too late. She was just 34 years old when Patricia Vassi was pronounced dead on arrival. The doctors found no signs of foul play. Instead, they cited a congenital heart defect and ruled that she had died from a sudden and fatal heart arrhythmia. Tragic, but supposedly natural. And just like that, the case was closed. But Patricia's family didn't believe it. Something was not quite right, and somewhere in their minds, they knew this wasn't the whole story. They watched as John Vassi, the once devoted husband, seemingly vanished from sight. While he had played the role of grieving widower, his actions told a different story. He slipped into the background out of reach, disappearing from their lives almost entirely. For nearly 3 years, he remained in the shadows. Then, long after most of the village of Cary, Illinois had gone to sleep one winter's night, disaster struck again. The night's silence was torn apart by an anguished call to 911. A house was enveloped in flames, with a family apparently caught inside. Neighbors flowed out of their homes, etched faces bathed in horror as the fire ripped through. And then from inside that hellfire there was this lone figure coming out screaming, stumbling, his eyes red. "My family is still inside," he was screaming. That was John Vassi. Firefighters battled through the blaze to search for survivors. They located an unconscious woman lying face down on the floor in a bedroom at the far end of the hall, and as they raised her up, a heart-rending finding was made beneath her. Hidden in the smoke and wreckage was a small child. Cary Police Sergeant Ed Fetzer followed behind the ambulance. Something wasn't right here. Riding in the back seat of the squad car with him was the father of that child, the husband of the woman, John Vassi. The next morning, news of the fire crackled over the radio as Jerry Deben drove down Interstate 355. A Christmas tree fire, it said, in a home belonging to John Vassi. He pulled his car to the side of the road, his heart racing. He knew it. He knew this was no accident. He called his wife, Betty, and together they pieced together something horrifying. This was the 4th house fire linked to John Vassi in just 7 years. 2 fires had burned down the same house in Twin Lakes. Another had burned down in Galena. And here was another. Each time, John had collected insurance money. Each time he had walked away unscathed. Jerry Deben didn't have a doubt anymore. His daughter Patricia hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been murdered. As detectives began to investigate Vasi's past, a pattern clearly emerged. Something didn't feel right, said Detective Ron DeLillo of the Cary Police Department. Why was John Vasi standing outside while his family was trapped inside? The deeper they investigated, the more the case seemed to have all sorts of unsettling twists. When Patricia's former in-laws came forward, everything fell into place. Wherever John Vasi was, disaster lurked. Fires, deaths, insurance payouts. Over and over again. DeLillo knew this case was bigger than him. He needed help. He called in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and soon their top fire investigators were on the scene. They picked apart the most recent fire, searching for answers. What they found was chilling. The fire had started in the living room, in the corner where a large, overstuffed chair once stood. There were no electrical sources anywhere near them. No cigarettes. Nothing that could naturally have caused the flames, which meant only one thing: someone had set the fire. That suspicion deepened when investigators found that both smoke alarms in the house had been disabled. It was no accident. It was a well-planned crime, and John Vasi had been at the center of it. They started to unwind his history of fraud and arson. Taking old photographs and reports, they re-examined the previous fires. What they found was incriminating. 3 fires, the one in 1998, another in 1996, and another in 1993, had been recorded as accidents at the time. Now, they saw the truth. All 3 had been deliberately set. John Vasi had spent years playing the system, orchestrating disaster after disaster, and collecting insurance money each time. It wasn't only fire, he had killed before, and investigators believed he was planning to do it again. By the time ATF agents caught up with Vasi, he was engaged to yet another woman, yet another potential victim. They warned her, sharing everything they had uncovered. She didn't believe them at first. Then she got an email from John. In it, he told her to take out 2 life insurance policies, $250,000 each, with accidental death benefits. She was to name him as the sole beneficiary. And then, almost as an afterthought, he wrote, "That way, if something happened, which it won't, the children would be taken care of." That was all prosecutors needed. The trap was set. A warrant was issued, and John Vasi was arrested. The probe turned up nearly $800,000 in insurance payouts, all connected to him. He had played the part of grieving husband, devoted father, victim of repeated bad luck. In fact, he was a cold, calculated killer. In January 2001, finally, he found himself in a court of justice. Charges as many as 18th fraud, 3 different arson, and attempted murder. The hearing harked 6 weeks long till he was read a verdict. To the end, it came just absolute. 8 months later, he was sentenced to 110 in federal prison. But one question still lingered until today. How had Patricia really died? The autopsy never proved murder, but her parents didn't need a medical report to tell them the truth. They knew John had killed their daughter, and now, finally, they had the one thing they wanted most: justice. John Vasi would never be able to hurt anyone again. For most, a 110-year sentence meant the end of John Vasi's reign of destruction. But to Patricia's family, the hurt didn't end with the verdict. The trial had brought them justice, not the complete truth. How did John Vasi kill Patricia? What really happened in that serene home on the day she died? The medical reports had left gaps. Too many questions remained unanswered. And though he was behind bars, Vasi had never confessed. Investigators had their theories. Some surmised he poisoned her, introducing something subtle into her system that would mimic a heart arrhythmia. Others believed it was suffocation, a pillow pressed over her face, cutting off her air until her heart gave out. The most chilling possibility, he had used drugs, inducing some sort of fatal attack that would leave no telltale trace. But without physical evidence, the method remained just speculation for any one of those theories. What wasn't a mystery, however, was the timeline. Patricia had been dead before John Vassie left to pick up the children. That much was certain. The signs of rigor mortis, the cooling of her body, the stiffening of her muscles. It all pointed to a time of death hours earlier than John had claimed. And yet, he had gone about his routine as if nothing had happened. He had picked Cassie up, taken her out for ice cream, even stopped at his place of work. The normality of his actions was stunning. He knew his wife's dead body would be waiting for them at home. He had been counting on the medical examiner to classify her death as natural. For a while, it worked. But if John Vassie had gotten away with murder once, how many others had suffered at his hands? As the investigators continued to unravel his past, they began searching for other potential victims. He had one of those lives just full of tragedy, former girlfriends, financial troubles that always seemed to clean up whenever a disaster happened, and the uncanny ability to manipulate people into trusting him. The pattern in almost all of them was one. He comes into one's life, gains confidence, and then at the right moment, he strikes. Insurance money was his motive, but the fires and deaths were his method. He had all but perfected his craft, time and time again, until he got caught. The police started investigating his previous relationships to see if other sudden, unexplained deaths could be attributed to him, but of course, much evidence was lost in time. Without confessions, without physical proof, there was little they could do. John Vassie sat in prison, quiet, silent from hope, allowing the closure of the families of his victims. Still, his conviction brought a sense of relief. The families of his victims could finally breathe again, knowing he would never walk. The thought of him luring in another woman, setting another fire, collecting another insurance payout, it was finally over. And yet, for Patricia's family, there would always be an ache. They had lost her too soon, in a way no one should have to lose a loved one. They had spent years fighting for answers, pushing authorities to take a second look, refusing to let her death be written off as natural. In the end, they had won. Justice had been served. But nothing could bring her back. For now, John Vassie stays behind bars, a man whose crimes stretched beyond arson and insurance fraud, a man who manipulated, destroyed, and killed. He may never confess, but his actions speak volumes. And though the fires are out, the scars of his crimes will linger. John Vassie may be behind bars, but stories like his are anything but rare. Time and time again, manipulative criminals use trust to further the most heinous tragedies and walk away with financial gain until someone refuses to stay silent. The family of Patricia never gave up seeking justice, knowing something was just not right, and their persistence helped bring the truth to light. And when you suspect foul play, don't turn a blind eye. Speak out. Demand answers. Point out what doesn't make any sense. Justice isn't just about punishing killers, but also about preventing the next victim. Keep your eyes open, be vigilant, and let no story like this pass into oblivion. For sometimes the thin line between justice and getting away with murder is just one person who refuses to give up. Darlene Zetterauer, the cherished daughter of Wilma Joyce and Robert Charles Zetterauer from Savannah, Georgia, shared an extraordinary connection with her dear friend Barbara Susan Schreiber, affectionately known as Barbie. Born just months apart in 1961, these two young ladies epitomized the essence of friendship. They celebrated their completion of the 8th grade at Attucks Middle School, eagerly anticipating a summer filled with adventure in Hollywood, Florida. On the fateful evening of June 18, 1975, Barbara and Darlene departed from Barbara's home, reassuring her mother that they were off to spend the night at their friend Valerie's residence. The specifics of their journey that night remain cloaked in a veil of uncertainty, with various accounts offering differing narratives. However, it is widely believed that they made a stop at the home of Gail, a close friend of Darlene. On that sun-drenched June day in 1975, The 14-year-old girls ambled through their Hollywood neighborhood, pausing on a bench at the intersection of Sterling Road and Northwest 40th Street. Gail, the last person confirmed to have seen the inseparable friends alive, vividly remembers spotting them seated together on a bustling street bench near the crossroads of Route 441 and Hollywood Boulevard. Her recollections of Darlene evoke the image of a spirited, vivacious girl, known for her playful habit of sweeping her hair back with her fingers. Like many of their peers, neither girl possessed a car or the ability to drive, often relying on hitchhiking to navigate their surroundings. They reveled in the carefree joys of summer before the onset of high school, their laughter echoing through the warm air. Yet, on that fateful day, Gail recalls a white van abruptly arriving near the bench. She witnessed both girls willingly entering the vehicle, and once the door closed, their destinies were irrevocably altered. Unlike her more adventurous friends, Gail was of a more cautious disposition. Although she felt the urge to join them, she ultimately refrained, apprehensive of her father's strict rules. The vigilant oversight of Gail's parents ultimately proved to be a life-saving measure, as it marked the final moments Darlene Zetterauer and Barbara Schreiber were seen alive. Their disappearance became a tragic enigma, shrouded in mystery. On the fateful morning of June 19, 1975, a family enjoying a fishing excursion stumbled upon the grim scene of two teenage girls, Darlene Zetterauer and Barbara Schreiber, lifeless and lying side by side along the canal, a shocking tableau adjacent to Highway 27, roughly 4 miles north of the now-forgotten trucker haven of Andytown. Investigators uncovered a harrowing reality. Both young women had succumbed to fatal gunshot wounds, likely inflicted by a large-caliber weapon, as evidenced by the copious bloodshed at the scene. Blood spatter analysis suggested that their tragic end occurred precisely where their bodies were discovered. Conflicting accounts regarding their attire emerged. While some witnesses claimed they were fully dressed, others hinted at a more sinister narrative. It was evident that both girls had endured brutal assaults prior to their tragic demise. In the aftermath of this horrifying discovery, Gail, the last person to have seen them alive, conveyed her fears to the media. "I was scared for them," she reflected. "I didn't comprehend the gravity of the situation. I am thankful I didn't follow them into that perilous unknown. I believe the perpetrator was simply a disturbed individual," she stated with a heavy heart. The pervasive uncertainty surrounding these events cast a long shadow over the community. The initial investigation led detectives to Valerie, the alleged host of the intended sleepover, only to reveal that the girls had never made such arrangements. This was a ruse frequently employed by Barbara Schreiber and Darlene Zetterauer to escape their parents' watchful eyes. Witness testimony suggested the girls may have been attempting to hitch a ride north, possibly in search of illicit substances. Despite the overwhelming support from the community and media, the limitations of contemporary investigative technology presented formidable challenges for the authorities. The investigation began with an absence of leads and the lack of technology to trace the victims' movements, presenting an arduous challenge from the outset. As time passed, the case grew cold. For decades, Broward County Sheriff Detective Andrew Giannino carried the burden of this unresolved case. A tireless quest for justice engaged numerous detectives, deputies, crime scene analysts, and forensic experts. Fast forward to early 2023, when the Broward Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit revisited the investigation. Detective Roberto Serras diligently scrutinized Darlene's clothing, extracting DNA ensnared within the fibers. This painstaking endeavor ultimately produced a complete DNA profile of the suspect after nearly half a century of unfruitful attempts. Armed with this significant breakthrough, investigators embarked on comprehensive database searches, leading to the identification of Robert Clark Keebler as the primary suspect, confirmed through his DNA. This revelation marked a pivotal moment after years of agonizing uncertainty, bringing the pursuit of justice for Barbara Schreiber and Darlene Zetterauer closer to fruition. Investigators uncovered a disturbing history of armed robbery, sexual assault, and aggravated assault associated with Keebler, stretching from California to South Florida. Authorities later confirmed that Keebler had passed away in 2019, thus closing the chapter on direct accountability. Detective Giannino theorized that Keebler had driven Barbara and Darlene to the secluded Everglades, where he subjected them to unspeakable horrors before taking their lives. Prior to the DNA breakthrough, no evidence had linked him to the case. While this advancement provided a semblance of closure, it also ignited further investigations into Keebler's potential connections to other unsolved crimes, including the notorious flat tire slayings in South Florida. Barbara Schreiber and Darlene Zetterauer were tragically denied the opportunity to fully experience life. Their families and the community continue to mourn their loss. Their narrative stands as a poignant testament to lives abruptly halted, their potential forever unfulfilled, a tragedy forever inscribed in history, longing for answers and justice still to be realized. In the year 2002, Brenda Heist was a 43-year-old woman residing in the picturesque Lancaster County of southeastern Pennsylvania. She shared her life with her husband, Lee, and their two beloved children, an 8-year-old daughter named Morgan and a 12-year-old son, Lee Jr. At that juncture, Brenda found herself entangled in the throes of a divorce, having sought an apartment of her own but failing to qualify for government aid. On February 8th, she took her children to school, burdened by feelings of despair and emotional turmoil. After bidding them farewell, she drove to a nearby town, wandered to a serene park, and sank onto a bench, tears streaming down her face. Two passers-by approached her, inquiring about her well-being, marking the last confirmed sighting of Brenda. In the days that followed, authorities discovered her vehicle abandoned in the bus station parking lot, alarmingly close to the very bench where she had sat. Initially, investigators speculated that Brenda may have been abducted or that her husband, Lee, could have played a role in her mysterious disappearance. The notion that she might have chosen to leave her life behind was not entertained. As Lee became the focal point of suspicion, the community's sentiment turned against him. Parents forbade their children from associating with his, and he ultimately lost both his job and his home. Despite exhaustive inquiries, no other suspects emerged, and the case grew cold, remaining unresolved for an agonizing 11 years. Then, on April 26, 2013, a 54-year-old woman named Kelsey Lee Ann Smith walked into the Monroe County Sheriff's Office in Florida, surrendering herself. She confessed to being weary of evading her past and revealed her true identity as Brenda Heist. For over a decade, while Lee and their children grappled with uncertainty regarding Brenda's fate, she had been alive, residing in Florida. On the day of her disappearance, a group of homeless individuals had approached her at the park, inviting her to join them on their journey, to which she acquiesced. This decision led her to Key Largo, where she lived under bridges and scavenged for food. Eventually, she found companionship with a man and spent the next 7 years in a trailer. Upon the conclusion of that arrangement, she found herself once again navigating the harsh realities of life on the streets. In December 2012, fortune smiled upon Brenda as she secured a position as a live-in housekeeper in the picturesque Tampa Bay area. However, her newfound stability was short-lived. A few months later, law enforcement stopped her for driving with an expired license plate, only to discover illicit substances within her vehicle. This unfortunate encounter led to a 2-month incarceration. Following her release, she faced further legal troubles, spending several weeks in jail due to unrelated theft charges. Upon her return to freedom, Brenda sought assistance from a Florida social service agency, ultimately residing in a tent community they supported. In a moment of courage, she chose to disclose her true identity to the authorities. By the time Brenda re-emerged, her children had already embarked on their college journeys, yet they were resolute in their decision to distance themselves from her. Her daughter, Morgan, poignantly expressed, "I hope to eventually forgive her one day for myself, not for her."